We think of home as a sanctuary, a place where the locks on the doors, the weight of the walls, and the glow of the lights keep the world outside where it belongs. But safety is fragile. It takes only a knock, a shadow, a sound where there shouldn't be one, for that illusion to shatter. Because when danger doesn't wait for you in the street, when it comes through the very doors meant to keep it out, there's no escape, no harness, no warning sign, no second chance. Tonight we step into the darkest kind of nightmare, one that unfolds not in abandoned alleys or haunted houses, but in living rooms, bedrooms, and hallways we all recognize. These aren't just crimes, they're invasions of the one place we're supposed to be untouchable. And the people who live through them carry scars that remind us, sometimes horror doesn't come from the outside world. Sometimes it walks right in. These are 3 horrifying true home intrusion stories. Tuck yourself in. Let's get started. Sometimes the strangest intrusions aren't violent. They're quiet, patient, almost invisible. In 2008, a man living alone in the small town of Kasuya, Japan, began to notice something that didn't make sense. Groceries seemed to vanish. Meals went missing from his fridge. Some nights he thought he heard faint creaks in the darkness. Just enough to raise questions, never enough to confirm them. At first, he chalked it up to forgetfulness. Maybe he hadn't stocked as much food as he remembered. Maybe the sounds were nothing more than the house settling. But doubt lingers. With each passing week, the mystery deepened. Eventually, he decided he needed proof, so he installed hidden security cameras that sent a live feed directly to his phone. For weeks, nothing unusual appeared. Then, one afternoon, after leaving home, his phone lit up. The camera showed someone moving inside his house. Panicked, he called the police, convinced a burglar had broken in. Officers arrived quickly, but the house looked untouched. Doors were locked, windows were sealed. There was no sign of forced entry. Still, the cameras didn't lie. Someone had been there. The search began, room by room, corner by corner. Then, in one Japanese-style room, an officer slid open the door of an overhead storage compartment. Inside, curled tightly on her side, was a woman. She wasn't armed. She wasn't aggressive. She was terrified. The woman was 58 years old, homeless, and astonishingly, had been living inside his home for nearly a year without him knowing. She'd slipped into the house one day when the door had been left unlocked, and instead of stealing and leaving, she stayed. Her hiding place was shockingly ordinary, a small closet space meant for bedding and storage. She had laid down a thin mattress and turned the cramped compartment into a makeshift bedroom. From there, she quietly lived her secret existence. She was slipping out to eat, bathing when the man was away, and returning to her hiding spot at night. Police later described her as clean, polite, and surprisingly organized. She hadn't trashed the space. She hadn't destroyed his belongings. She had simply existed, invisible, just a few feet above the man who thought he lived alone. The story drew worldwide attention not because of violence, but because of the sheer strangeness of it. How did someone share a home for a year without being noticed? How many nights did she sit silently in the dark, listening to him breathe, walk, and sleep while he remained oblivious? In the end, the woman was arrested for trespassing. Authorities tried to piece together her hidden years, such as how she ate, how she moved, and how she managed to never be discovered until that final day. But one fact remains the most unsettling. The man's sanctuary had been breached not once, but every single day for 12 months, and he hadn't known. Sometimes horror doesn't knock down your door. Sometimes it waits, patiently, in the quiet spaces above your head. Cheshire, Connecticut, a quiet suburb, tree-lined and carefully kept, the kind of place where doors are locked more out of habit than fear. But on the night of July 23, 2007, that quiet was shattered in a way that stunned not just the town, but the entire country. 2 men, Joshua Komazarjevsky and Stephen Hayes, chose the Petit family known as their target. Inside slept William Petit, a respected doctor, his wife Jennifer, and their 2 daughters, 17-year-old Haley and 11-year-old Michaela. The nightmare began as William was beaten with a baseball bat while he slept. His hands were tied as his family was held hostage. Hours passed in escalating terror. At one point, Jennifer was forced to drive to a nearby bank to withdraw money. Staff grew suspicious as she had tried to signal for help, But before police could reach the home, the violence inside spiraled far beyond robbery. Back at the house, Jennifer was sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Michaela was assaulted as well, tied to her bed alongside her sister Haley. Gasoline was poured, and flames consumed the home. Both girls died in the fire. William Petit managed to escape, bloodied and broken, stumbling to his neighbors for help. He was the only survivor. His wife and daughters were gone. When police arrived, the house was ablaze. The two attackers attempted to flee in the family's car, ramming police cruisers in desperation before being captured. The scale of cruelty was hard to comprehend. Prosecutors called it the ultimate house of horrors, a crime marked not only by brutality, but by the psychological torment inflicted on its victims. In court, Komisarjevsky and Hayes each blamed the other, but the facts were clear. Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela Petit had been tortured and killed in their own home. Neighbors struggled to process what had happened in their peaceful community. Some had seen the smoke. Others had seen the men crash through a barricade at nearly 60 miles per hour before the car failed and came to a stop. Many described the Petits as kind, devoted, and deeply woven in the fabric of the town. Their sudden loss left behind a wound that never fully closed. Komisarjevsky and Hayes were both sentenced to death, though Connecticut would later abolish the death penalty. The trials revealed the grim details of the attack, details that continue to haunt anyone who followed the case. For William Petit, survival meant carrying the memory of what was taken from him. If your family was destroyed by evil, you'd be there for your family, he told reporters. It's the only thing you can do. The Cheshire murders remain one of the most shocking home invasion crimes in American history. A family destroyed, a town scarred, and a reminder that even the safest streets can hide unthinkable darkness. In Denver, Colorado, a modest home on West Moncrief Place stood as a picture of ordinary life. Its owner, 73-year-old Philip Peters, had lived there for nearly half a century. He was a retired railroad employee, a husband, a father, and a musician. He played the mandolin and guitar, often alongside his wife Helen in the Denver Guitar Club. It was through this same club that Peters first crossed paths with a frail man named Theodore Edward Coneys. Back then, neither of them could have imagined how their stories would one day intertwine. By the fall of 1941, life had changed for the Peters family. Helen was in the hospital recovering from a broken hip. Philip, left alone in the house, leaned on his neighbors for company. They invited him for hot meals in the evenings and made sure he never sat in silence for too long. It was a routine that gave him comfort in Helen's absence. On the evening of October 17th, Philip was expected at a neighbor's home for dinner, just as he had been many nights before. But when the hour grew late and he hadn't arrived, neighbors began to worry. His car was in the driveway, lights glowed inside the house, yet every door and window was locked tight. A young neighbor forced her way in through a loose window screen. What she found inside sent screams echoing across the street. Philip Peters lay on the floor of his bedroom, his skull shattered by brutal blows from a heavy cast-iron stove shaker. The attack was frenzied, far beyond what was needed to kill. Blood stained the walls and floor, with a trail leading toward the kitchen where the weapon had been abandoned. Peters' valuables were untouched. His murder was savage, but it wasn't robbery. Police combed the home, searching for signs of intrusion, but came up empty. No broken doors, no forced locks. The killer, it seemed, had vanished into thin air. For months, the case grew colder. Helen, now a widow, eventually returned to the house with a caregiver. But strange things began to happen almost immediately. Food disappeared from the kitchen. Objects moved on their own. Bumps echoed in the night. Her caregiver became convinced the house was haunted and left in fear. Helen soon relocated to live with her son, leaving the house vacant. Even in its emptiness, neighbors continued reporting noises and foul smells from the home. Police checked, but again, nothing found. The mystery lingered. Then, in July of 1942, two detectives, Roy Bloxam and Bill Jackson, decided to watch the house directly instead of waiting for another call. One afternoon, they saw movement in the window. A man. They rushed inside. The house seemed empty, but then, footsteps overhead. In a dark hallway closet, they spotted legs scrambling into a small opening in the ceiling. The detectives lunged, grabbing hold, dragging a gaunt, filthy man back down to the floor. It was him, the killer. His name was Theodore Edward Coneys. Thin as a skeleton, weighing barely 75 pounds despite standing nearly 6 feet tall, He looked more like a ghost than a man. Police took him into custody, where he confessed to everything. Coney's life had been a string of hardships. Born in 1882, his childhood was plagued by sickness. Doctors once told him he would not live to adulthood. Frail and withdrawn, he avoided sports and devoted himself instead to music. By the early 1900s, he was living in Denver, occasionally meeting with mandolin clubs, including one led by Philip Peters. But Coney's never found stability. He drifted through cities, jobless, homeless, scraping by in doorways and alleys. By the 1940s, he'd returned to Denver with nothing. Hungry and desperate, he remembered Peters and decided to visit his home, hoping for help. When he found no one there, he broke in. What he discovered inside was more than food. In the attic, a cramped crawl space barely larger than a coffin. 36 inches high, 40 inches wide, 12 feet long. Filthy, dark, crawling with spiders. Yet Coney's decided this would be his refuge. From then on, he lived above the Peters household. He crept down at night to steal food, always returning to the shadows. When Helen went to the hospital and Philip was left alone, Coney's grew bolder. Sometimes he moved about while Philip was still awake, testing how close he could get without being seen. It became a game of shadows, until the night Philip caught him. Coney's insisted to the police that he acted out of fear. Peters discovered him raiding the icebox. He believed the old man would kill him, so he struck first, seizing the stove shaker and bludgeoning him in a frenzy. Then, while neighbors gathered for dinner and police scoured the home, Coney scuttled back into his crawl space. He was there, hidden in the attic, as the investigation unfolded below. For the next 9 months, he remained in that suffocating hole. Winters were endured with the faint warmth of a toaster he scavenged. Summers left the space stiflingly hot, almost unbearable. He surrounded himself with spiderwebs, jars of jam, and filth. Officer Fred Zarno, one of the first to inspect the crawl space, gagged at the stench and later remarked, "A man would have to be a spider to stand it long up there." The press seized on that moment. The name stuck, the Denver Spider-Man. Coney's admitted his crime in an 8,000-word statement. "I killed Peters because he caught me robbing his icebox." He wrote, "I don't know why I hit so many times. Yes, it was just the hatred I'd been storing up for years against everyone who had the things I'd always wanted and never could get." In October 1942, Theodore Coney was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He spent the rest of his years in the Colorado State Penitentiary, dying in 1967 at the age of 84. The legend, however, lived on. From novels to television shows to podcasts, the tale of the Denver Spider-Man continues to echo. It's an eerie reminder that sometimes the greatest danger isn't an intruder breaking in from the outside, but someone already living within the walls. Home is supposed to be the one place where we feel safest. Our 4 walls to keep the world out, a lock on the door to keep danger away. But these stories remind us of a darker truth. Sometimes the danger is already inside. A woman hiding above a man's closet. A family torn apart in their own living room. A stranger nesting in the shadows of an attic. Each case is a haunting reminder that walls and locks can't always protect us from what lurks in silence. And that's what makes home intrusion so terrifying. They leave behind more than crime scenes. They leave scars on families, on communities, and on the very idea of what home means. So tonight, when you close your doors and switch off the lights, remember, not every story ends when the locks click shut.